Thanks for tuning in to our top 50 games of all time.
These are going to be recorded as video for our YouTube channel.
You can check that out at youtube.com/boardgamebarrage.
They say the truth is the number one stopper. They say you think, but you never want to speak up. They say you're hiding there, you're busy, but what's on your mind, kid? What's on your mind, kid? They say out loud there will never.
Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. This is our top 50 games of all time series. This is part 4 of 5 and is episode number 49 of the Board Game Barrage podcast. I am your host among hosts, Kalen. I'm joined today by Mark and
Host
Neilan.
with the most, Mark? If you're a host among hosts, I'll be host with the most, and you'll be what?
I'm the host that doesn't boast, Neilan.
I'm very
Look at this.
confused.
This is like
I'm
a comedy podcast, really.
also known as the Red Tank, joined by the Green Tank and the Orange Tank, the unfortunately colored orange
What is wrong
tank.
with orange?
As always, we'll be talking about board games, and today especially we will be covering games number 20 through 11 in our favorite games of all time. I had to check which games we've been talking about, because we've been talking about a lot of games.
Yeah.
I'll kick us off.
Yeah, kick us off.
Okay, my number 20 is my highest Rosenberg game. This is Caverna. I know that I should like Agricola more than Caverna because they're in a lot of ways the same sort of game, but Agricola being the much tighter game. But I just can't help but like Caverna more. There are a couple things that differentiate the games. Caverna doesn't have the cards that some people like, and some of these guys both have had issues with the cards. So that's completely out of Caverna. Caverna is a little bit freer in terms of the tightness of it. There's more spots. Feeding your workers isn't such an issue, which again should be something that I like less. And also it's got a couple other things. There's a questing aspect to Caverna where you can equip them and send them on little quests. And there's a wild resource. Anyway, it does what you want from this type of Rosenberg game, the whole resource gathering, resource conversion, that sort of thing. But whereas Agricola, the appeal is in the tightness of it. And I think I might like Agricola more if I hadn't been playing with like very good players, which sort of soured my experience. You do come out of Caverna always sort of feeling like you built something sort of grand. Agricola can be tight and you can just like, you build something and you see your farm, it's great, but you always have to make sacrifices. Caverna, you still have to make sacrifices. You're not always doing the thing that you want, but there's always like a secondary option that's available to you. So there's still definitely a tightness to it. It's not as loose as maybe Feast for Odin, but it's what you want from Rosenberg game. It's that farming, resource manipulation. So yeah, I love it. It's my number 20, Caverna.
Yeah, I really like, Agricola's already been on my list. I really like Agricola and Feast for Odin. I think I would like Caverna. I've just never played it.
Yeah, if you like Agricola and Feast for Odin, there's no way you're not.
Yeah, I'd imagine. Yeah. I have to try it at some point.
Yep.
My number 20 game is Archipelago. This is a semi-cooperative Euro game where you start in a boat and you sort of head towards these islands that you sort of explore and grow, and there are resources on these islands, and you're sort of growing your little economy, sort of collecting resources and trading them to both a local and international market. One of the key separators of this game that sounds very Euro so far is that, like I said, it's a semi-cooperative game. You're ostensibly trying to keep certain parts of the island in balance to avoid these crises that show up, but each player sort of has one part of the scoring conditions for the end of the game and also one part of the end game condition. So you're sort of focusing on what you think is going to score you the most points that's specific to you, while also trying to work out what other people are perhaps focusing on so you can score highly on their scoring conditions before someone inadvertently ends the game based on their end game card. There's also a chance of a hidden traitor, which will be someone who's working to actively sort of overthrow the other players at the table, so to have the crises sort of take effect and end the game. You're only sort of cooperating as far as you need to get through the game, and then ultimately you're sort of trying to get the edge up on the other players on your specific scoring conditions. It's a very cool, satisfying game. The market mechanics in this are so clever in the way that you have these market boards that as you contribute resources to the markets flood and either makes those resources worth less, adds to the crisis of the island. And it's kind of also a very mean game. There's a lot of negotiation, a lot of sort of wheeling and dealing, so to try to say like, well, no, I need you to help me here, otherwise I'm just going to like burn this whole thing down. And it really, really works. It's pretty satisfying because of that. Like it's very shouty and just tense.
Yeah.
And that's sort of where the game will live or die. There's sort of this fine Euro game underneath it, but is it, 2 hours into a game about building an island, are you willing to look at your friends and say, well, I'm not contributing to this crisis, so either the game is over and we all lose or you're doing it?
Right.
If you're okay doing that, Archipelago is devious. We're going to talk about it some more. Much, much, much higher. Super, super unique experience found in Archipelago.
Yeah, I don't know many games quite like it. I mean, we spoke about New Angeles, which is maybe the closest comparison. But yeah, pretty unique game. That's Archipelago.
All right, my number 20 best game of all time is Fuji Flush. This is a Friedman Freeze, the only Friedman Freeze game on my list. This is a very, very simple card game that feels like a gamer's replacement for Uno in some strange way in my mind. Yeah. You play a card down onto the table, and then you check if that number that you have played is bigger than any of the other numbers on the table. If it is, they have to discard their card and draw a new one. You're trying to get rid of all your cards. If a card gets back all the way around and no one has played a higher card, then you have successfully gotten rid of that card, and now you get to play a new card from your hand. That's a dumb game that is all luck-driven, but what makes the game fun is negotiating and the alliances that are formed, because if I play a 4 out on the table and Mark plays a 4 out on the table, we now collectively have 8 points together. So someone would have to play a card higher than 8 in order to have us discard those cards and go back to start, so to speak. This game is very, very loud when you play it with our group of friends. It has become sort of a riotous affair of sort of screaming the numbers that you're looking for. When we first started playing it, it was just, hey guys, you should play a 2.
Right.
It'd be great if you played a 4, and now there is a lot of shouting. There's a lot of train noises for some reason in our group. Choo. Yeah, but the 2 train is the easiest. There's the most 2s in the game, so people start chanting choo almost immediately as soon as the game starts. And then it's very fun to upset a train that's in progress, and it's very fun to try to organize one. The end game gets a little wonky when you only have 1 card left, but if you're just looking for a silly, fun time with a small deck of cards, Fuji Flush is really, really good.
Yeah, I agree. I like this one a lot. My number 19, this is by, I'm going to butcher the names, Sebastian Dujardin, who made Deus, and Xavier Georges, who did Ginkopolis and Carson City. I didn't know that the pedigree was in these games. I love Carson City. I never played Ginkopolis. But I will not butcher the name of the game, although I know Kalen refers to this as Troyes. This is Trois.
No, I don't.
Just kidding. He does not, to be fair. This is Trois. Trois is a dice rolling, dice manipulation, dice placement game. What you're doing is you roll dice, and they're allotted to different players, and you're placing them on the board in order to get area control in some parts of the board, to fight off threats, to get money, to get currency. But one of the things that makes this game unique is that you can actually buy the dice of other players. So you may have a lot of nice numbers there, but Kalen or Neilan may go ahead and pay you for the right to use your dice. There's a lot to like about this game. I love the Euro/randomness, seeming randomness from the dice roll, although that's mitigated in a lot of ways. I love how modular the game is. The threats that you get are represented by cards that change from game to game. It's, again, another very tight game. I like that you can, again, buy the dice from other players, and that's a way to sort of circulate the money around, which is nice because money can be very tight in this game. Trois, fantastic Euro dice rolling, dice placement game. It's not the last time that you'll get that on my list, the dice placement and rolling, but it's fantastic. That's Trois.
Not the last time we'll talk about Troyes either.
My number 19 game is Aeon's End, War Eternal. This
semicolon, Battle of the Infinite.
Yep.
Semicolon, Unending Sacrifice.
Only one subtitle. This is the newest version of Aeon's End. I never played the original, so Aeon's End, War Eternal is the only one I've played, but it's fantastic. I can't imagine Aeon's End is substantially different. So the way that this works is it is a cooperative deck builder game where there is a giant monster, some sort of big demonic force like attacking your town. And pretty simply, like if the minions that the monster, the boss as it were, summons defeats all of the players, then you lose. Or if it defeats the town, you lose. And you win if either you defeat the monster or run its deck dry. The rest of the game plays out sort of, as you imagine, sort of Dominion deck building style, where you're accumulating money which you would use to buy new cards, which go into your deck. But there's this neat twist on that in that you don't shuffle your deck when it runs out. You just take your discard pile and flip it over, and the order stays the same. So there's this idea that you might want to sort of play cards in a specific order or group certain cards together so that they'll come up again in that same order in subsequent rounds. So you're not just building your deck, you're building timing into your deck as you play. The player order is sort of randomized per round. I've mostly played this as 2-player, which I believe is probably considered the best way to play it. You have a deck of cards, and of 6 cards, 2 of those cards will be for each of the players, and 2 of those cards will be for the monster. Each round you shuffle that, and each turn you reveal one of the cards, and that's who gets to play. So you can't reliably say, okay, I'm going to set you up for the next perfect thing. You sort of have to be self-proficient and hope that at the end of your turn you've left the board in a good enough state that if the monster does activate next round, you're not just going to be wrecked, which feels pretty good. It doesn't feel like you can just absolutely game the system. There's a little bit of sort of self-reliance and self-sufficiency to it. One of the things I like the most about it, sort of more thematically speaking, I would say, is it feels like, to me, like a video game boss monster. Yeah. Each of these bosses creates a very unique game that feels pretty different and sort of alters the rules in slight ways. If you've ever played an MMO and you sort of like raiding, it's got that feel where you're like, your first run against it, you're going to get destroyed, but you're learning how to defeat the boss. Right. And then you play it again, you learn a little bit more until you've got your routine down, you know what you're going to be doing. And it's still very challenging at that point, but you feel like you're working on the strategy that you've learned together. And then once you've done that, you go on to the next boss and you start all over again. It's a very cool game. It's a very cool idea. I'm very excited to play more of this. I still haven't gotten through most of the bosses that I have. I haven't, like I said, touched the first edition, and there's a legacy version that's coming very, very soon, which I'm super excited for. I
haven't played War Eternal. I've only played the first edition, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was such a great co-op. I love that, like you said, the variable turn order.
Right.
It does do a lot to like eliminate the pre-planning and the quarterbacking you can get in a lot of co-op games.
Yeah. As to each of those versions, obviously War Eternal is the one that I'd recommend. I'm pretty sure you couldn't go wrong with Aeon's End, whichever you can get your hand on. But that's Aeon's End, War Eternal.
My number 19 best game of all time, I believe, is called Genoa right now. I believe it was previously called Traders of Genoa. And that could be vice versa, but
no, you're right. I think
it's now Genoa.
Yeah.
This is a negotiation game, a negotiation Euro set collecting game that feels unlike anything I've played either before or since. Essentially, every step of your turn can be sold to other players in the game. You're trying to move around this sort of market and collect various spices to sort of fulfill contracts and deliver things. But you start with a stack that represents the amount of players, I believe, in the round. So there's 5 tokens, and you start in a random spot on the board, and then you say, well, I'm thinking of going here to pick up spice, but, where do you guys want me to go? And then everyone can sort of bid, and they literally put money on the board. I need you to go here.
Right.
And if you go here, I'll give you $1. Other people say, well, I need you to go here and give me the contract that's there, and I'll give you $3 for that. So you are anxiously engaged in this game every step of everyone's turn. The only difference on your turn is you're the one who gets to decide.
Right.
But on every other turn, you're bartering to have the actions work in your favor and determine where you go. This is sort of overlaid on a fairly light set collecting style game, but it's really fun. The only reason this isn't even higher on my list because it's a little long for what it is. And as you can imagine, everyone being involved in every decision of every movement of every turn makes for a longer game. I'm surprised we have not done this together. This is one that I played quite a bit, almost every week back in New York. So it's a great game.
This is one that I have, but I haven't played. But yeah, you make me really want to try it out. My number 18 is by a guy who worked on Arkham Horror. I didn't know he did. Sandy Peterson. This is Cthulhu Wars. Cthulhu Wars we've talked about on the show quite a bit. This is one of my favorite dudes on a map game. Again, asymmetry reigns on my list. Factions are all very much asymmetrical, not only in the powers you have, but you also have powers that you can unlock, these spell books, and it's up to you to choose how you unlock them or in which order to unlock them. I think that's really, really cool. It's a visceral game. You've got these incredibly huge pieces on the board that you move around and you battle with. And it's also visceral insofar as it's very confrontational and it's very dice chucking. You're throwing like handfuls of dice a lot of time. But for a game that's so dice chucky, it mitigates the dice in a lot of really, really nice ways, which I really appreciate. I'm sure we're going to talk about this game more later.
Yep.
But yeah, for me, it's one of the best dudes on map game. It also, our games have been, I guess, a little bit on the long side, but I think it's supposed to play fairly short. I mean, within a couple hours. So yeah, that's my number 18 game, Cthulhu Wars. Love it.
My number 18 game is Alchemists. This is a Euro worker placement mixed with a deduction game.
Goody.
Yeah, Kalen's favorite word.
Everything one could want in a board game, guys. It only needs a little bit of VR. That would be the only.
Oh, can you imagine it with
Yeah,
VR?
VR. Would be fantastic.
I mean, it does have an app.
It does actually have
have
an
an
app.
halfway
Yeah,
there.
totally.
Narration and VR is what we're missing.
What you're trying to do in this game, you're essentially playing alchemists, and you're trying to create potions by sort of discovering the properties of these 8 different sort of alchemical like ingredients, these reagents that are sort of on the board. So their properties are randomized each game in how they contribute to one of the 3 different potions, like either green, red, or blue. So they'll either sort of contribute a positive in green or a negative in blue, and so on. So what you're trying to do is test these ingredients by sort of creating potions out of them, discovering their properties, recording them on the sort of grid you have. Say, oh, this ingredient clearly did this, so it might be one of these 2 things. This ingredient did this, so it might be one of these 2 things. And then sort of work your way across the ingredients, sort of narrow down exactly what they would produce when you combine them. This is done using an app. So you would sort of take 2 of your ingredient cards, scan them into the app, and the app will say, okay, this gives you this. So at the start of the game, it's randomized and decided these properties, and you're just trying to figure out what the app knows that you don't. This is also mixed with this really cool, with this worker placement game where each round there's a turn order track, and you decide whether you either want to go higher up the turn order track and get less rewards, or lower down and get bigger rewards. But that means you're sort of obviously better or worse suited for like competing for these very tight action spaces. Often on each spot, the order that you go to them really matters. So for example, there might be a student that you'd be testing these potions on, and the first time he gets negatively affected, then everyone else has to pay him a coin in order to test a potion on him. So you're incentivized to go there earlier. So there's little fun things like that where you might want to get to a spot faster. There are people you can sell the potions to in order to make money. So you're crafting these potions for gold. You're sort of testing them, and this is all in sort of service of this sort of science university academic publishing phase where you're trying to sort of publish your findings faster than someone else does in order to get victory points. There's also a whole process where you can disprove someone else's findings, and so you're like, no, that's definitely not that, and then you get points and they get penalized. So you might be like straight up lying about one of the results. You kind of hope that no one sort of like calls you out on it. It's a very, very clever game. I've said this before, that it almost feels like Science Academia, the board game. Like it's just got all of those components mixed with this really, really cute theme, fun app integration. Yeah, it's a really solid game that I like a lot. It's Alchemists.
Just waiting for the VR edition of that before I jump in.
You can see yourself mixing the potions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
My number 18 best game of all time that is obviously better than Alchemists. What other stuff? Le Havre, Caverna.
Cthulhu Wars?
No, not that one. Is No Thanks. This is as small a filler game as they come. It's probably my favorite filler. I'm looking at my list. Nope, there's one more.
Biblios.
No, it didn't. It's my 664th best game of all time, Biblios. And in No Thanks, all you're doing is trying not to get the cards. But you're spending your coins in order to do so. So everyone is throwing coins on top of a card. 35 is the worst card in the game. So when the 35 comes out, one by one, everyone is dumping their chips onto that 35. And whoever runs out of chips first is going to have to take it. Those chips count as positive points. So you want those chips. So at some point, you might want to take a card because it'll help you in subsequent rounds. So you're kind of trying to pay attention to who may or may not have coins left to bid. I mostly go for broke in this game, and it leads to really silly situations. I think this works well equally with gamers and non-gamers, which is something that I look for in a game. I really, really enjoy No Thanks. I think it's been around for a long time. It's a premier filler game.
Yeah, I love No Thanks. Fantastic game. And like you said, it works great with gamers or non-gamers because there's enough strategy to satisfy gamers, but it's easy enough to teach to satisfy non-gamers. Definitely. Okay. This is one that Kalen's been waiting for, my number 17 game. This is by Thomas Lehman of Race for the Galaxy and Roll for the Galaxy. This is 1846, The Race for the Midwest. This is the first 18XX game to make an appearance on my list. It may not be the last. 18XX games, for those who don't know, are train games that have...
For smart people.
No, not necessarily. I'm not being elitist. That have two main functions or two main aspects to them. There's a stock market aspect, and there's a operations aspect where you're actually running your railroad. The thing that I like about 1846, in addition to being one of the an introductory game in the 18XX series, is that it's maybe like the most forgiving of the 18XX games. It's like the most like sort of Euro-y of the 18XX games. And the 18XX games differ in a lot of ways. The maps are almost always different, and some of the rules are different in the ways you score and the ways you play. But the thing that 1846 focuses on that is appealing to me is that it focuses on the operations part of it. Some 18XX games are more about the stock market, some are more about the operations. 1846 is about running, primarily you succeed by running a good company. So you don't have to really so much worry because it is sort of forgiving and not as confrontational as other games. You can sort of focus on literally building your engine. So you're focusing on running a good company. You don't have to worry about pumping up a company and dumping it like the stock market manipulation. It's again, beginner 18XX game. I think Neilan would like this. I think you might like it because there is like a confrontational aspect to it. But yeah, 1846, The Race for the Midwest is my number 17 game.
Cool. Yeah, I've said before, like I want to try one of these, and I think this is the one you said that I should start with.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool.
I do want to try an 18XX.
Yeah, I think you might like it. I think you would like some of the more confrontational aspects of it, of other ones.
Okay, my number 17 game is Inish. I feel like there was this idea that Cyclades, Kemet, and Inish was sort of this almost trilogy of dudes in the map games. Of that grouping of them, at least, Inish is my favorite. It seems like a substantially simpler game to some extent to explain, at least, because all of the actions are just represented by cards that you draft. So the actual rule set is relatively simple, but all of the complexity comes in just sort of performing the action as written on your card. There's also an extremely small card pool. So it's very achievable that after a game or two, you would know every card in that game and know what to look out for, know what to draft, know what everything does. More importantly, know what other people's capabilities are and what to sort of watch for. All of that is in service of a game where you have a group of warriors or tribesmen that you're moving out through different sections of the map. The map sort of grows as the game progresses, and each section has like a new power that gets unveiled. It has one aspect to it that I found a little bit troubling, and it's perhaps extended our first couple of games of it, in that it has a very bash the leader type approach to it, in that there are a number of different ways to win, and then at that point, when someone is very close to being about to win, you have to just go after them and then knock them back down, and then someone else is about to win and then you knock them back down. Our games of this have run long, but they've been hugely, hugely satisfying. It's a game that I want to believe plays as shortly as other people tell me it does. Everyone says like, oh no, you can get it done in under an hour. That's not been the case, but regardless, I've always enjoyed it because of its simplicity and sort of because of its purity to some extent. Like it's a game where there's a lot of negotiation, so talking around the table. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting because this one works equally well as a two-player game without any negotiation because the draft is so tight. You're basically trying to figure out which of the actions you want to do versus what they're going to be able to do. That small card pool is so unique and specific, and then you combine it with sort of this entire deck of super special magical powers that just break the game. And so you need a certain type of personality who enjoys that really tight draft where you know if you don't take the Geist that someone else is going to get the Geist, and it's probably that guy, and knowing those 16 cards and then being okay with a thick stack of cards that just entirely interrupt and change and screw with your plans. So that's a weird combination, which is why I think it makes Inish more of a niche title. It's actually higher on my list, but we'll maybe talk about it a little more when we get there.
For me, Inish is like the prototypical whole is less than some of its parts, to me. I feel like every part of Inish I like in theory, but when it comes together, it just doesn't hit. I still have a lot of hope that I'll like it upon further plays, but for some reason, it's mainly the bash leader thing. I mean, one cool thing about Inish is that whole announcing you're going to win. That's
Right.
a cool aspect, but it even lengthens the time where you can bash the leader. You know what I mean? It extends that, and it just makes the game, in my experience, run way, way too long and be way too, again, bash the literary and doesn't get to the end. But I've heard too many good things about it. And again, the parts are so interesting and appeal to me that I'm sure I'll like it upon repeated plays.
My number 17 best game of all time, better than so many Euro games, is Telestrations. Telestrations mostly needs no introduction. This is a silly party game where if you keep score, you're a tryhard. All you do is get a word, and then you draw that word, and then that is passed to the next player who must write that word. Then it's passed to the next player who must draw what that person thought that they were looking at. Back and forth it goes until it gets back to the original player, and then everyone does story time, and who doesn't love story time, where you sort of flip through and show everybody what happened to each word, and you can go from one place and end up somewhere entirely different. And it's quite funny and humorous, and it's a game where everyone is just laughing the entire way through. If there was one sort of universal party game, this is probably the one that I would recommend first and most often. We talk about Codenames, obviously a fantastic party game, but is still a word game, whereas this is, you're having a party, you should probably get Telestrations.
Yeah, I agree with that. That makes a lot of sense.
The more you talk about it, I actually almost feel like Telestrations should be on my list. It isn't. I feel like it tends to be, I mean, not that this is a knock against it, but it's more of a goof and activity than something that feels like a game. But it's so, yeah, you're right. It's so fun and funny, like every time I've played it, perhaps unfairly unrepresented on my list.
It's okay. I bring Board Game Barrage, the voice of the people. You guys can keep Mensa selecting us 18xx games.
All right. Well, my number 16 game may fall along the lines of what Kalen's accusing me of. So I know this game can be too long. I know that the cards you can draft can be too swingy. And I know the whole dominance versus population aspect can be a little confusing. But I can't help but love Dominant Species. I know we just played it and you guys came away from it not maybe liking it so much, but there's just a lot that I still love about Dominant Species. I love it's not so much, but there is asymmetry in this game between the factions, between the types of animals. I love that. And the fact that you're playing as mammals versus birds and stuff like that, it's just cool. I love the balance between long-term strategy and the tactical nature. You do need to sort of be able to adjust on the fly, but it certainly does behoove you in this game to have a long-term plan, because there's so many points that are accumulated at the end that if you don't have an eye on the long term, it does hurt you. I really love the way the actions work in this game. There's a sideboard, and you place your pawns on it, and the actions just fire off down the list. So you know the actions on top will occur before the ones at the bottom, and just the way that it goes just seems to fit really, really nicely. I like that, and the actions sometimes work. The timing of them works to sort of lend themselves to that way that they're set up on the board. So just that action selection thing is a thing I really like. But the thing I like the most about Dominant Species is just the epic nature of it. This maybe is a reason why the length of the game doesn't bother me so much, but it does. I mean, it's very abstracted. You're talking about cones and cubes. There's no little animal pawns or anything, but every time I play it, it does feel like a battle for survival between your animals and your opponent's animals. The cards that come out are swingy, but like they're just like Cataclysm, and you've got like this Ice Age, and it just feels very grand to me, and that's just something I love about it. It's no surprise that the designer of this game, Chad Jensen, is almost exclusively known, aside from this game, for his war games, because this is, to me, like a war game. I think a lot of people have said that. It's nothing unique to say that. But this year, Dominant Species Marine was announced, which is coming out next year, which is supposed to be a streamlined version of this. So maybe that'll be even better. But for me, I'm fine with the length involved in Dominant Species just because of like the grandeur of it. So that's my number 17, Dominant Species.
I think I can sum up the reasons I don't like Dominant Species is just being broadly how vast the decision space is for it. Like, I think you have to stare at the board and, decipher the way dominance works, which is a whole other thing, for 10, 15 minutes before you have any idea what you're going to do. Right. And it's so much to have to work through and so time consuming that I don't know. It felt too much for me to want to do repeatedly for 3+ hours.
Yeah, I get that. And it can get, toward the end, it can get a little mathy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is not what you want necessarily, but still love it.
I enjoyed my one play of this game. It was too long. It was mostly Neilan's fault. I do think that my vision of the game is sitting at my kitchen table looking at Neilan as he observed the hexagon part of the board. But the thing that I love most is sort of where you're choosing which actions will go off for you in a round and sort of having to figure out, okay, this one is first, so I need to make sure I do that, but I desperately need this down here on 7.
Right.
And this one is going to be more contested, so I need to put that there first. So you're sort of going around and around choosing actions, and then they're going to all fire off together at the end in a specific order. I liked that tacticalness. It was sort of the long-term strategy part of it that I had no idea what I was doing, and did not help me win that game of Dominant Species.
And you did win, right?
Did I win?
I think you did.
I thought maybe. I can't remember.
Yeah.
Mark, you would remember.
I definitely didn't win, which is all that matters.
But Dominant Species, even as a theme, like, I'm just so on board for being novel.
Yeah.
But I'd love to see a shorter version of that.
Yeah.
If Marine is that.
The Marine one sounds...
Be super cool.
For sure. My number 16 games, broadly speaking, are the Exit the Game games. It feels weird to just pick one of them. These are escape the room in a box style experiences where you're just solving a series of puzzles. Each of them is themed slightly differently, but I feel like the theme is paper thin and doesn't really even lend itself to the puzzles, especially all of the time. But the puzzles are so well designed. And one of the things that sort of sets us apart from other similar types of games is that they're single use. And they lean into that into the puzzles in a big way, in that you're required to, or at least encouraged, to cut up pieces of the booklets and the cards, tear things apart, re-engineer things. Just you make sort of like this mess of like pieces as you're trying to solve these puzzles from different parts of the box. It's a really, really cool. Every one of them actually, some of them are better than others, but every one has been a very satisfying experience just purely on the strength of the puzzle design. You'll find a solution or something will click and you'll be like, oh man, that's so clever. And then you overlay this piece and you see how this works and it fits out and it points to this thing. It's fantastic. And each of these puzzles, each of these boxes eventually leads to one big culminating puzzle, which you're collecting the components for along the way. I think a lot of my specific memories of specific games will sort of live and die on how good that final puzzle is. Often they're incredibly satisfying and just novel and require you to think in ways you just typically don't in these sorts of puzzle games. Yeah, that's the Exit the Game series. There are about 12 of these available right now. They're all very cheap, around $10 or $12. I'd highly recommend them, even though they're only single use. Really, really good puzzle games.
I've played the Unlock and I've played Escape Room the game, which I liked. I like both of them, but I've heard nothing but great things about Exit. I'm really excited to play those.
Of the other sort of alternatives, I played Unlock and kind of distinctly didn't like it. Maybe that's not worth going too much into depth, but yeah, Exit is the one.
I think most people would agree with that.
My number 16 best game of all time is an escape room in San Francisco. The Alcatraz Escape Room in San Francisco is one of my favorite board games of all time.
How is that not a board game? Like, is this a criticism of Exit?
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, I have never played an escape room game that is better than even the worst escape room I've been to.
Yeah, I don't even disagree.
And then it's a single-use thing, so...
But you're also talking about something that is a much more expensive production that you're buying a ticket to versus something where the components are worth $10.
Right.
Yeah, this is one that I don't know how to defend, but it actually strikes me as the least like a board game of anything that I've ever criticized of all of them. But I think we'd have to dive into just why that is. But as a fun activity that you can do, yeah, they're super fun. No need to go to semantics. Like, apparently I'm the one who always says, yeah, we don't need to go there, and then I go there. So that's odd. My number 16 best game of all time is Inish, just mentioned by Neilan. It's so elegant, and Mark, your thoughts earlier actually do make me think that I do love all of the systems more than I love the game. And that's a weird thing to say, but I love the drafting in it. I love the deck of special powers. I love that each land has like a little bonus. And then I love the negotiation that's baked into that system. I've had some weird plays of it and some really, really fantastic plays of it. And this is one that I'm eager. There's an expansion coming out next year. I'm eager to integrate that and hope that gets it back to the table. It's decidedly like simpler and smaller than a lot of the other dudes on a map type games. And that's what I like most about it. But this has fantastic art, fantastic production, a very intriguing, different game, and it feels unlike anything else I've ever played.
One thing we didn't mention that's also one of the things I like the most about it is the combat system is so muted. Like, it's very simple. It's like you keep going back and forth, kill a unit, kill a unit, kill a unit, until one of you decides, okay, that's it, we're done. Yeah. And that's the entire combat system, which for a dudes in the map game feels very unusual.
That is cool.
Yeah.
My number 15 was mentioned before, I think on the last episode by Kalen. This is Mr. Rondell Mac Gertz's Imperial 2030. I love this game. This is like a sort of like a stock market game with these like world domination trappings. Like you said, you sort of play like a shadow government sort of Imperial, where the name comes from, like person behind the scenes who are just like doesn't care what part of the world is burning or whose battles are going on. You're just interested in behind the scenes, like making the most out of it, getting the most for yourself. The shifting like focus that each player has is fantastic. Like Kalen mentioned in the last episode, you can be assigned Russia at the beginning of the game and you think, okay, I'm all about Russia. And then all of a sudden somebody takes Russia out from under you and now you don't want Russia at all. Like now you're anti-Russia and you're all about Brazil or whatever. I've never played a game like it where, again, the shifting strategies. And again, it is a stock market game. So if that economic thing intrigues you, then that's another reason to dive right in.
One of the funny things that I just was reminded of is you're kind of narrow-minded into what your country is up to. And then suddenly you acquire another country. You know, you suddenly take control of China from Mark, and you're like, Mark, what did you do to China?
That's right.
Like, what was the goal here?
Yeah, right.
Like, why did I...
left me the carcass.
A carcass of China that's left over, and wow, I've got to figure this out.
Right.
Because suddenly your scope changes, it broadens, and now you're looking at China, and you're like, oh... This is not going to go well.
Right. That's true. So yes, my number 15 game is Imperial 2030.
Cool. My number 15 game is Watson and Holmes. This is another deduction game. This one is similar to something like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective in that you have a number of mysteries that are just pre-written in the game that you can work through. Each one has a specific solution. You're sort of going around gathering clues, learning more information about the case, but the key differentiator in this case is that you're competing. Unlike Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, where it's a cooperative game, in Watson and Holmes, you're each trying to solve the case first. So there are a bunch of different locations represented by cards, and you sort of bid tokens to sort of try be the person that gets to a specific location. Someone might beat you to it, and then you just maybe bid more than them to get to there. You also have the option of reading. Once you read that card, you might spend one of your tokens to lock that card to make it harder for someone else to get there. So there's a little bit of bluffing, like, was this actually important? Right. Maybe it wasn't. You're furiously taking notes and trying to see where other people are going, seeing if they feel like they have a handle in, so maybe you're chasing them down a little bit, following in their trail. It's a really, really fun game. One I like a whole lot. I feel like I'm always itching to play this. It sort of seems quite specific in the number of players you would need to make it work well. You want to have enough players that you're blocking locations frequently, so there's some competition over it. And as in most games of this type, it lives and dies on like how well written and how well designed those cases are, how clever those solutions feel. I think part and parcel of like Sherlock Holmes as a character, as a genre, as it were, is these little leaps of logic that you get to, where it's like, oh, it must have been this thing, and that connects all the dots on like how that happens. It's not just about assembling bullet point information. It's about sort of connecting the dots on how that information ties together to solve the case. And some of the best games have been when you get to the end of it and you discuss around the table of like, wait, how did you find this thread? Right. What got you there? Like figuring out how other people solve the mystery is one of my favorite parts of that, because you're getting disparate pieces of information depending on where you went. I really, really enjoy this game. I want to play a whole lot more of it. Yeah, that's Watson and Holmes.
This game inspires fear of missing out more than any other game that I've played. And what that means is all of a sudden, multiple players are bidding up to go to the bank. And I have no idea why people are wanting to be at the bank. And then all of a sudden, it's this arms race to get to the bank.
And you figure, like, I got to get to the bank.
Yeah, and then you think, well, I guess I need to be in on this. And then other people see me going to the bank, and it could be nothing. But you physically feel like I'm missing something.
Yeah,
and these guys have sort of started to catch on. And that's really fun feeling.
Yeah.
My number 15 best game of all time has been mentioned before. This is Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. I think this is a fantastic social deduction game because it takes some of the fangs out of its brethren like the Resistance. It's less scary to play with non-gamers. It's a very simple game having murder weapons and means cards, and someone knows who the murderer is, and you are asking you're sort of giving clues that help lead the players to the murderer. So if the person was murdered with an axe and the forensic scientist tells everyone that it was a bloody death, you're trying to negotiate and basically say that your axe was not the most bloody thing on the table, but it was in fact the syringes over there. And then someone will say, well, the syringes aren't bloody by themselves. And you say, well, they're full of blood. And then you sort of start arguing back and forth about what may or may not be meant by the person who's not really allowed to communicate with you.
Right.
At its best, it's a great game. I've seen rounds of this devolve, like Mark has mentioned on previous episodes, but I think it's so fast, it's so quick, and you're playing a new round of it that it's a really good game.
My number 14 is by Reiner Knizia. No other Reiner. This is the fifth of his games on my list, so that's 1/10 of my games are Knizia games. This is the last one, but this for me is his masterpiece. This is Tigris and Euphrates. This is a mean, tight tile laying game and civilization construction game. You are laying tiles on the board to expand empires, and when they meet up with other empires that are also growing, you have a battle. There's a blind bidding aspect to it. Everybody's in charge of 4 different sort of, I guess they're heads of state. I don't know what they are, but different factions of the game. And you're trying to score points through all 4 different types. So you're scoring black points and red points and blue points and green points. You score them separately. But and I think this is like the prototypical Knizia scoring game. The way that you score in this game is that whatever of the 4 variables you scored the least in is what your score is. So you might be doing great in black. You might have 15 black points. But if you end up only having 1 or 2 blue points, your score is 1 or 2. So it demands balance, demands diversification. So again, that's a very fascinating aspect and a very interesting aspect that you have to play all sort of sides. But it's just so mean and so tight. And yet the rule set is quite simple, as other Knizia games tend to have. But I think if you want the prototypical Knizia experience, for me, it's Tigris and Euphrates.
I think there are very few games where I felt at once, like in my first game, that I didn't know what I was doing, and I would immediately wanted to play it again.
Right.
Like it just the intense feeling of like once you understand it.
Right.
I actually haven't had that second game yet, but I really, really want to.
I think it's fantastic. Love it. Number 14 for me, Tigris and Euphrates.
My number 14 game is one that's been on Mark's list, I think, in the previous episode. Sidereal Confluence, Trading and Negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant. We've spoken about this at length before. This was our favorite game from last year. That's the site's favorite game from last year, I should say. This is a game where it has the veneer of a sort of a dry cube-pushing Euro. You have a bunch of cards that are just converters, converting resources from one to the other. But all of the grease, all of the core of the good game is just this free trade where you have resources that you need that you're not necessarily producing. Someone else at the table does. I'll give you this, you give me this. Both of our engines sort of benefit, and we can produce more of what we need. You're researching new cards that will give you more converters, more ability to sort of reuse your resources. It's a game that feels a lot friendlier to me than most of negotiation games. You're incentivized to help other people in order to get more of the resources that you need to boost your economy. It's a fantastic game. I love Sidereal Confluence. The asymmetric sort of player power is also one of the highest selling points for me, in that every single alien feels completely different. introduces new elements to the game. One of the factions is running a bank. One of the factions is running like a protection racket. It's so bizarre. And
one of them like produces wild resources.
Yeah. It's a really cool thing, and every combination of races seems to produce a wildly different game.
That's true.
Sidereal Confluence, trading and negotiation in the Elysian Quadrant.
Nice.
I think it can't be stressed enough how unique the positive trading aspect of this feels. Most trading games, you really come away feeling like you got by someone else. You know, like someone has a resource that you really need and you have to pay them through the nose to get it. But in this game, you just feel like you're building something together, or that your every trade is just this positive interaction where you're making something with someone else. And that's I have not played another game like it in that sense.
And to that point, like we said this before, but you're not allowed to cheat other players. In fact, like you're heavily punished for doing that. If you make a promise, you're going to keep it.
My number 14 best game of all time is Omen: A Reign of War. This is my 2-player battling card game a la Magic the Gathering that I will play forever. There's been a couple of different versions of this, most recently a Kickstarter for a version from Colossal Games. Omen: A Reign of War has probably my favorite board game art of all time in it, and it has a very simple system of trying to achieve 6 feats. So imagine if you're playing a sort of Magic the Gathering style game, but you're trying to have 3 beasts out on the board at one time, trying to have 3 spirits out on the board at one time. And once you do those, that sort of unlocks that. And once one player has done 5 of 6 of those objectives, the game ends and you score. Omen: A Reign of War is super quick, super tight, and the different expansions just sort of change out the units in a smart way. I don't think you need the expansions at all, but just in terms of a quick game to get out and enjoy feeling sort of powerful as you're fighting over different stations, Omen: A Reign of War is really, really good.
Yeah, we just played this. You just introduced us to this, and I remember liking it quite a bit. Yeah. So in a previous episode, I tried to teach a lesson about not judging a book by its cover when I was talking about Castles of Burgundy, which has a brown box and the pieces aren't so great. But let he who's without sin cast the first stone. I fell afoul of this problem myself because it took me quite a while to play this game because the box is very drab. The game is very old. It's one of the very first worker placement games. But finally this year, I got Caylus to the table, and I love Caylus. It is such a good worker placement game. It's the granddaddy in a lot of ways of worker placement, and it holds up. I remember we were playing it. It wasn't something I was dying to play, as I just mentioned, but we started playing it, and I just thought to myself, this is like, it still feels fresh. This is like such a tight, clean, tough game, and I played it a couple of more times as soon as I could. So this is a worker placement game. You're placing your workers on the board. A lot of this game is brutal. There's a lot of brutal aspects of the game. One of them is that you place workers on the board. Every time you place a worker, you have to pay a coin. Money is extremely tight in this game. But then if you don't want to place a worker, if you've run out of them or nothing appeals to you, or you want to be mean, you can pass. Once you pass, the cost now to place any workers is now 2 coins in a game that's already, again, very tight with money. And then if the next person passes, well, now it's 3 coins. So, obviously there's an incentive in these type of games to place as many workers as you want or as you can, but Caylus makes it really tough to place those workers. The other big thing about Caylus that's most well known for is the provost. Caylus, the board is a road, and the worker placement spaces fire off down the road. So, one and then the other as you travel down. All of them fire off until you get to the provost. So once you get to the provost, any worker placement spaces in front of him will not activate, even if you've placed a worker. You've paid your 1 or 2 gold to place that worker there. Costs you a lot. You really need it to happen because everything in this game is, again, very, very tight. And yet somebody uses an action to move the provost. And there are multiple opportunities to move the provost. There's a space early on the road that is explicitly for moving the provost, but then also everybody gets one more chance to move him. So there's a lot of negotiation. And again, this game is super tight. So that negotiation for please don't move the provost. I need this to happen. Like, it's so big. You place buildings on the board as you do, as you might in a lot of worker placement games, and people can go to your buildings, and a lot of times you will get a benefit for that, or every time they will pay you. So there's that whole aspect of using other people's buildings. It's just such a good game. The plain board and the plain box put you off, or the fact that it's an older game put you off. I just can't plead enough that you should play Caylus. It's such a good game. Such a good game. That is my number 13. Are we on? Caylus.
I've only played this once, but I think it would creep into the top 50 with enough plays.
Yeah.
God,
it's so good. I just love how much it blew me away. I was thinking, like, this is like, how good could a worker placement game that was like one of the very first ones, if not the first one, be?
Right.
So good. So good.
Cool. My number 13 game is one we've spoken about already. That is Cthulhu Wars. I'm sure we will talk about this again. But the things I like about Cthulhu Wars that are different maybe from what Mark mentioned earlier, or perhaps these might be some of the reasons he likes it too, is there's the asymmetry of the factions, when that if you play a different faction, you're playing a very different game. But also, every time you play a faction again, you could build it a different way. Like it has this sort of novel spellbook system where you have to achieve an objective in whatever order you choose, and then choose a special ability in whatever order you choose. So there are just a bunch of different ways you could build a specific faction that would feel very powerful, and it's almost this sort of like this grueling decision of like, well, I need this, but I also need this, and I need this, and they all feel good. They all feel vital at every point in time. And then next time you play that faction, you might want to build them completely differently. And that's independent of playing a completely different faction, which plays entirely differently. Yeah, like you said, like dice chucking games are not normally high on my list, but because of how you're throwing as many dice as you are, I mean, that in itself mitigates the lack of dice a lot. And it feels so satisfying. You sort of roll into these big battles with your giant figures, roll a ton of dice, knock people around the board. This is definitely one of my favorite dudes in the map games. That's Cthulhu Wars.
My number 13 best game of all time is Dogs of War. This is sort of the opposite of Caylus in that it's the most overproduced Euro game ever created. Thank you, Cool Mini or Not. This was a Kickstarter that was not a huge success for Cool Mini or Not, so it's been sort of hard to come by the expansions for this game. But it is a Euro-ish game where you are placing your workers on sides of a conflict. So there are 3 conflicts happening per round, and there's different factions. So red is fighting blue this round, and green is fighting yellow. And then you are placing your houses, sort of your workers for hire, into that conflict in order to get that space. So you might just want a coin, and so if you put your worker there, you get a coin. But you're actually contributing to that battle back and forth. And so someone else might have a hidden need for red to be doing well. So you're always balancing, like, sort of not hidden objectives, but you're sort of investing in the different houses. So you have a strategy for the game, which is, hey, I need red to win a lot of battles. But you also need to balance that against, hey, I really want this card or this icon right now. It does a really good job of just sort of being a complete package for me. I really enjoy this game. I know we have not gotten to play it together.
I really want to play this.
And I have all the bells and whistles, which is fun. It makes it more fun. But I just love the idea of sort of contributing to a larger conflict that is happening and being friends with someone right now, but then in the next round when red is going against your faction, suddenly you're no longer interested in being friends. That's Dogs of War from Cool Mini or Not. It's a fantastic game.
Yeah, I can't wait till we get around to actually doing it, all 3 of us, because I think it would be really, really, really good.
My number 12. I spoke about Trois earlier, being a dice rolling placement game. This is my favorite dice rolling placement game by the designers of Tzolk'in. This is The Voyages of Marco Polo. Okay, so I've talked a lot about asymmetry. This is the capital of asymmetry. Marco Polo is...
The capital?
This is the capital.
Over Cthulhu Wars?
Over Cthulhu Wars.
You're a liar.
This is a good Euro game, for sure. Very, very good Euro game, and I'll talk about that more in a second. But the way to teach this game is you describe how the game works, you describe all the spaces as you would in a Euro game, and then you tell people about the different character powers. And everybody is like, that cannot be possible. The different powers in this game are all game-breaking, and I mean game-breaking. Like this game, you're rolling dice, and you're placing the dice on the board, and the number of pips affect how well things happen. And one of the powers is you don't roll dice. You assign the dice to any number you want. How could that work? It does. I don't know how it does. There's an aspect about, there's a map and there's an aspect about moving on the map, and it's very, very tight to move on. It makes it very, really difficult. One of the powers is you get 2 guys moving on the map. What the heck? Crazy. Like, it doesn't work, but it does. There's a cost involved in when somebody takes a space. The hard part about it is, you can place your dice on top of there to take the same action, but you have to pay. And the amount you pay is based on the number of pips on the dice. One power, you don't have to pay. It's just, believe me when I say, when you are taught this game and you learn the powers, you will be blown away by how crazy the powers are. But it works. It just works. I've played this game a number of times now. Every single time, as I'm like giving the people powers, I'm like, I just still don't know how it's going to work, and it always does. So that's fantastic. That's the reason to play this game. But the Euro game behind it is great also. And the thing that I like most about it is, in addition to being very interesting and very, again, like tight, is that it always feels like it ends one round too early. I always get the feeling like I'm just on the verge of like making a big move, which can be like a detraction. It could be something that's like negative about the game because you want to feel that fruition. But the reason I like this is it just like, for me, when I end a game of Marco Polo, I always am left wanting more. Like, I always feel like I'm on the verge of something, and instead of being frustrating, just because the game is so interesting and the powers are so great, and again, the Euro is great, it just leaves me wanting to run it back right again. I love this game. My number 12, Voyages of Marco Polo, Asymmetry Capital.
Yeah, I loved my first play of this again. I want to play it again.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I actually think you would like this one too.
Yeah, no, I've been eager to play it. Just need to get invited to that party boat in the sky.
My number 12 game is Pictomania. It's a game that we spoke about earlier, criminally long ago, I think. When I was making this list, one of the things that surprised me is sort of how much I just kept moving Pictomania further and further up my list. I have a lot of Euro games, sort of a lot of certainly much heavier games towards the top of my list. But Pictomania is a game that I love so much. I will never, ever turn down a game of Pictomania. Just to re-describe it, it's sort of a Pictionary style game where you have a row of cards and you'll get a secretly assigned one of those cards and one of the words on that card. You then have to draw that picture while you're simultaneously trying to guess everyone else's picture. So all of this is happening at the same time in real time. So you're drawing and looking around the table so that you can sort of turn in your chip and guess someone else's picture while still trying to draw yours. So you kind of want to do a little bit of both very, very quickly. It's very stressful, and the best thing about it is the way that the words escalate. As you get towards the higher difficulty of the cards, the differences between them on a single card are absurd.
Yeah.
So it's just like the idea of like, well, no, that was clearly this word. How can it be that? I mean, it's great. There's a lot of shouting. It's very, very stressful because just trying to do both things at once is very hard. And then you're looking around the pictures on the table thinking, well, this must be that, which means this is that. And you feel like all of those decisions are wrong. Yeah, it's a really, really fun game. It's definitely not for everyone, I think, as Kalen's indicated before, but it's one I would certainly recommend trying because it feels pretty novel. It's a Vlado Kvartal's game, who's one of my favorite designers, and it's really, really cool.
Yep.
I love Pictomania.
I love it.
My number 12 best game of all time is Codenames. I think this game needs no introduction. If you are a gamer who likes party games at all, you should buy Codenames. It's that cheap. Just do it. It's a word game. Everybody loves it. You can find it anywhere at Target, Amazon. Just buy it. Codenames, my number 12.
Yeah. My number 11 was one of the hottest games coming into this year. This is by Eric Lang. It's Rising Sun.
My number 11 game is also
Is
Rising
it really?
Sun.
Oh,
Yes.
great. Okay,
There you
perfect.
go.
We can join up.
Yeah.
Kalen, you can just sit right there.
It's like why do we even have both of you? You know what I mean? You've
Right.
got me and then maybe
The
one other. So,
You could argue, why do we have you? We're so...
oh, you guys just want to
Yeah,
look at
exactly.
each other and
Yeah.
talk around in
That's
circles.
right. Exactly.
Yeah, people would love that.
So, Rising Sun. Asymmetrical powers. Not as much as Marco Polo, I would argue, but it's still great. It's still absolutely great.
Yeah.
Cthulhu Wars, right. But it's great.
Also worth saying, this is a 2018 game.
Yes.
Is it the highest up on your list? In
I
2018?
believe that is, yes.
It's
I believe
certainly
it is.
on mine.
Yeah.
So yeah, this one just shot up my
Yeah.
rankings.
Right. It was billed as a diplomacy game, diplomacy successor. It's not, but there is enough negotiation in there to be, satisfying if you're looking to scratch that itch. The way the game is built is fantastic. I like you draw tiles, you select one tile, and that's the action that everybody gets to play. But you, as the person who selected it, gets a bumped up version of it. And if you have an alliance with somebody, they also get the bumped up version of it. The design is clean. It's not too fiddly. The combat is simple to understand. There's a lot of sort of paths to take when it comes to victory. Yeah, I just love the entire package. Again, Eric Lang, cool mini or not, the pieces are...
Man, the production
is fantastic.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
If you've never seen a picture of the board, it's just got it's got unusual colors that you don't see in a board game.
Yeah.
These soft
pastel
tones. Yeah.
Fantastic.
The figurines, I mean, don't need to say, are beautiful. Some of them are massive. It's really, really great. Each round sort of has these 3 distinct phases, each of them feels like very, very critical. Like the alliance phase is huge.
Yeah.
Then the action phase is massive. And then you go to the combat phase where you're spending the coins you use, and that feels like that decides everything else.
The combat.
So like every progression of the system just feels like more and more brutal and more important. It has this thing also that's similar to Blood Rage where the cards escalate over the course of the round. So the stakes get higher and higher as you're going. It's probably one of the games I played the most of this year. It's really, really good.
Yeah, and you were saying like it escalates even within a round.
Yeah.
And that combat, like you said, I didn't even mention this, the blind bidding combat system
Right.
is so excruciating.
So
yeah. And the fact that the winner of a combat pays the losers. So you're actually, even in your win, you are aiding somebody else for a future battle, perhaps. And that's another big part of the strategy is I've got a big battle coming up late.
Right.
So even if I lose this one, I'll get more resources for later on.
Yeah, you might sort of like cave on an earlier battle to supplement your income for a later one.
Right.
Yeah, it's really, really clever.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah.
That's our number 11.
Rising Sun.
I'm not convinced that these two hype masters are right about Rising Sun specifically. Rising Sun is too structured for me as a game, like the sort of rounds and like this will go into conflict, then this, and it sort of feels too formulaic after a while, too on rails overall. I also think that the degree of randomness that comes with the different factions, with the different cards, with the different monsters that are in play leads to feeling like you're sort of scripted into what your faction should be doing. And if you don't sort of go after that strategy, then it's actually the downside of asymmetry for me occasionally is it actually feels like I have less choices because the game is all about being efficient, and the most efficient thing you can do is use your advantage. I'd love to play more Rising Sun. I know I like Rising Sun, so I don't think that's...
Although a previous podcast episode made...
Very contentious.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well... I'm also better than them at Rising Sun, so that's a previous podcast episode. I will take us home with my number 11 ranked game of all time. This is a designer that I don't believe has been mentioned before, and it's a travesty. That is Sid Saxon. This is I'm the Boss. I'm the Boss is a negotiation game through and through. It is a series of escalating deals where everyone plays a character in the game, and you might need character B, A, and C, or D to go on a mission to collect $5 million. And you look around the table, and you're like, well, I need Mark or Neilan and Christina, and then we can go on a mission. And I say, well, let's split this pot equal ways. And Mark will say, well, no, I actually want more of that money. You have a hand of cards that you then use to send Mark on a vacation. I don't know where he's going on vacation, but so you can spend 20 minutes negotiating sort of this perfect truce, and then someone's like, actually, no, I'm the boss, or actually, no, you're going on vacation now, and suddenly you have to deal with them. That's one of the funniest power moves is you sort of need one person or the other, and you spend a long time deciding on the one person, and then that one person says, oh, by the way, you can't deal with him anymore. Now you're just dealing with me, and my fee's even higher.
Right.
This is so funny. It is so fun. It is old, and there is some weirdness in the card play of just having all these cards and drawing them. But just this sort of, it feels like it's going up and up and up, and the amount of money that you get for each deal is going up and up and up, and just a zany negotiating game that is not as serious as some of the other negotiation games. That's what I like about I'm the Boss. It's a fantastic game. Sid Saxon is a cool designer. He's made other games like Acquire that I think is really, really good as well. Old school.
Yep. Love this game. This is great. It's a little, like you said, it's a little finicky with the card placement and stuff like that. But yeah, I love the negotiation. I love that I'm the boss move. It's so great.
That is going to do it for this episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and as well as our Board Game Geek Guild, which is www.com. Wow.
That's a weird.
That's
we got www.com. That's pretty good.
Yeah, we got it.
Early.
BoardGameBarrage.com/guild. Tune in next week for our top 10 games of all time. I'm sure there's some you'll agree with and some you won't. I will leave it to you to decide which team you are on.
They've already decided.
And thanks so much, as always, to Heart Society Music for letting us use their fantastic song, What's on Your Mind, Kid, from their album, Wake the Queens. You can find more of their music at heartsocietymusic.com. Thanks so much, guys.
See you next
Bye.
week. We did it.
Boom.
I'm high. I'm ready. I want you to save me from myself, baby. There's a story.
Episode number what? 49. Oh, that's right.
Did we open the last one at 48?
Yeah.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. This is episode number 48, part 4 of 5 in a special series on the top 50 games of all time.
It's actually 49.
What?
You said 48.
I thought we just decided it was 48.
No, we just said it was
49.
49, and we said, did we do this for 48? That's why you had 48 on the brain. Do it over?